Okay, I'm just going to continue to let people in as they come in, but I'm going to get started. Thank you all again for being here. This is our second to last in our virtual event series that we've been really excited to offer all of our families. So today, as you know, we are here with our head of school, Dr. Morva McDonald. In 2 weeks, we'll have the last of our event series, which is going to be our parent panel, which we're really excited about. And then we do record all of these and they'll live on our events page on the website, but I'll also send folks reminders with the link on where to find those. And then as always, if you have questions about your particular application or our particular application process, you can always reach out to me at any point. We are in the file reading stage of this where we're really getting to know your kids and all of the great materials you put together for us to get to know your kids. And then just as a friendly reminder, we release admissions, sorry, I'm just letting folks in. We release admissions decisions on March 19th. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand it over to you, Morva, and welcome.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate all the work that you're doing to make this happen in this particular year, but always. I'm at home, so if suddenly things happen, like you hear children or my dogs or something, we'll have a very real moment like we are all now used to about being in our own spaces. So just bear with me if that happens. Very likely to happen in my household. I'm super excited to talk to you. I appreciate having this time with you. I'm going to talk just a little bit, and then I'm really going to open it up to questions, because I think mostly Ken and I have a goal together, which is to really provide you the information you all are looking for and need as you're making a really important decision about the upcoming year for your kids, right? And so we're interested in what do you need to know and what are you looking for? And we'll talk broadly and we'll talk about anything, in this process. So a little bit about myself. I am in my 6th year as the head of school. For some reason, it seems always very important to me to say, but I think it's important to know that I've been now at Giddens for 6 years. Prior to coming to Giddens, I was a faculty member in the College of Education at the University of Washington. I had been at the UW at the college for about 10 years, and I had a line of research and work around teacher preparation, particularly as it relates to preparing teachers for diverse settings. So I come with a kind of a background in education that is really focused in on teachers and teacher learning and teacher development. And my own children, who are older now, one is just about to enter high school and one is currently in high school, were both at Giddens before I was at Giddens as a head of school. So I have a little bit of a perspective of the school as a parent, right? And that experience, I chose that for my own children, chose the school for my own children, and then came to work there professionally about 6 years ago, as I said. Here's what I think is really unique, actually, about the school. And it has to do with really the 3 strands of kind of educational work we do, right, with kids. And those 3 strands are really focused on, one of which is kind of thinking about the content learning that kids need to have, right, as they move through preschool and pre-K and elementary school. How do they become really conceptually grounded and skills grounded in mathematics? How do they build their literacy skills in ways that allow them to be critical thinkers, but develop kind of the content base that they need as they head into middle school? What do they understand about social studies and history? And how do they engage kind of the main concepts and content of science, right? And that's the content work of the school. Always when we're thinking about that work with kids, we're also working on how do they understand themselves as learners, right? How do they identify what their strengths are? How do they understand when it is they need to advocate for themselves? What do they need when they're in a group? Where can they stretch, right? In collaborative work with others, because that work is all a component, right, of learning, right? And it's not just the social emotional work of learning, it's actually how do you learn, and helping kids develop an understanding of themselves in that way is super important, particularly as they head off to middle school, where they're gonna have to manage, right, and advocate for themselves in some particular ways. So that's an important piece of the school. The second strand is the social emotional learning work at Giddens. And I think one of the big advantages from my perspective about Giddens is that it started as an early childhood center, essentially, right? It started in early childhood. And what that means is that for almost 50 years now, actually, the school has really been grounded in thinking about how do you think about kids' well-being? What's the intersection between a kid's social emotional learning and the way that they engage content learning? And that thread, right, that thread is from preschool all the way through 5th grade. We don't kind of suddenly go, oh, well, they're no longer first graders. We don't need to attend to their social emotional well-being, their relationships or dynamics with others, right? We see that as a really important fundamental thread of the work at school, to view your kids comprehensively, to understand them holistically, is a deep value of the school. And it's very deeply grounded, I think, in the architecture of how the school thinks about the work of teaching and learning and thinks about what makes for a really high quality education for kids that sees them holistically. And the third piece of really a Giddens kind of education really focuses on these bigger questions of justice, right? Kind of helping students develop a moral compass, right? Both content related to justice. What are things we should know about as we move from preschool to 5th grade about how the world works, about historical issues, about race relations in the United States, about the way gender plays out, right? That's kind of the content work. How do we identify moments of things that we really care about as individuals, and how do we motivate ourselves, right, to take a stand or to have a voice or to persuade somebody else, right, in relationship to the thing that we care about? That's kind of the big J for justice in our world, right? That's like really helping kids look around the world and say, oh, this is how the world is organized. How do I relate to it? How do I identify with it? How does my friend identify it with it? What do I do if I need to stand up for myself or somebody else in this context? And then the little J for justice is about everyday relationships, right? Giddens, for an independent school, is a relatively diverse community. It has approximately somewhere between on any given year, 50% of the students who go to Giddens are students of color, many of whom are multiracial. There's a wide economic kind of distribution of families. And so part of the work is to think with kids about, how do I notice difference? When does difference make a difference? When does it matter? When does it not matter? What's my position in relationship to somebody else, right? These are all the kinds of questions that arise in a school, right? That isn't just thinking about diversity as I sit next to somebody who looks different than myself, but what does that mean, right? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for my friend? What does it mean for their families? What does it mean in the broader context of the world? And I think what's particularly unique about Giddens is that we don't conceptualize these things as separate pieces of a pie. There's not content work and then social emotional learning and then justice work, right? There are moments, right, of deep integration when all three of those things really come into play. And that makes for a holistic kind of comprehensive experience for your child, because that's actually how those things play out, right? When we're just humans, when we are interfacing with humanity, those are the things that we see and that we notice and that we have to leverage, right, when we're managing the broader world around us. And so that, I think, is what's unique about it. I think that's what's powerful about it. And there's lots of work to do around those things. There's lots of learning that we're doing as a community. But I think it is the heart and soul, really, of the school. It's certainly why I chose the school for my own children. And I think the school just has a lot of strength in those ways. So I just wanted to point that out for you. And then I really am just open to questions, things you're thinking about, everything from nuts and bolts to big ideas, kind of whatever is really on your mind as you're moving through this process and heading somewhat soon, maybe not too soon from your vantage point, but somewhere in the future, you'll have a decision to make. And it's a really important decision. And we always trust that families are going to make the best decision they can for their families.
I'll just add that you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a
Yeah.
question, or you can put it in the chat and I'll read the question, whatever feels comfortable to you.
I have a question. I have going into 4th grade and going into 1st grade. And I'm realizing that the very textbook standard progression of things isn't the best fit for us. How hard is it, or do you think it's appropriate, especially for my older, to switch for just those last 2 years, to not come from the same background as the groups that have moved all the way up through your program, and then to have to transition again in 2 years? How hard is that transition from going to a very different school of thought to something that's going to be more holistic,
Yep.
and then having yet another change on the back end? I know that's a really specific question.
No, I appreciate it. I think it's a good
So-
question. No, I think it's a great question. I think it's one that's relevant to anybody, right? Because it's a little bit about how does a kid make a transition into a new environment? What kind of environment is this like? How does the environment adapt, right? To kids who are in transition. Kids are often in transition more so than ever this year. And I think the second question is about what's the relationship that if my child is really grounded in, for lack of a better word, a kind of more conventional approach, right, to teaching and learning, and they're entering, in the Giddens sense, kind of a very project-oriented perspective. What do we notice about that, right? The first thing to say about that is, as a community, as a school, we have a fair number of kids who come into the school, right, in the later grades or along the way, right? I actually think that's great. I think that's good, because one of the things it does is it means that the community, both the teaching staff, the faculty, and the kids, don't get super locked on to this idea that like this is my group, right? And nobody can kind of enter or exit it, right? It allows for an understanding that actually community is built all of the time, right? And it's not about, oh, we've been here 3 years and this person is new. It's more about how do you invite somebody, right, who is new, and have an understanding of the things that they might be concerned about, or the places where they might worry about, are they going to make friends? How do you reach out to them? How do you make that? And I think the school, because of its openness, right, in that way, is really well equipped in the practice of doing that with kids, right? This is the unfortunate part about this year, that if we were in a regular year, your kid would come on a visit, and I would bet you, I would put a lot of money down on the reality that they would leave and be like, this was great. People were super nice to me. They really got to know me. They reached out to me, right? And I think that's the experience, and they will have that experience right out of the gate. I'm not worried about that, right? The second thing I would say is, the unfortunate part is that many schools, for a whole variety of reasons, right, which we could talk about, is that often schools are asked to do a lot of different kinds of things for students, and are under very different kinds of structures than an independent school is. And as a result, they often end up doing very kind of reductionist styles of teaching, right? And that's not their fault. That's not the individual teacher's fault. It's a whole systems problem in there. But what we know about teaching and learning, particularly what we know about learning, is that learning is dynamic. It's collaborative. You want kids talking. You want them engaged in something authentic. So as soon as they have that experience, they engage in that experience, because that experience is the way, right, we understand learning to be. They will just immediately fall into that space, right? It's actually, they won't experience as a transition. So I don't see, right, kids who are coming from different styles, if you will, of learning, struggling, because they immediately view that it's purposeful, it's meaningful, right? And that would resonate with any of us, right? And it resonates with them. So I would flag it if I had a big concern, but we have a lot of experience at that. And I don't see any concern, whether that's in first grade or whether that's in fourth grade. My oldest child transitioned to Giddens at first grade out of kindergarten. So made that transition, and really that was very, very smooth for them. So I hope that's helpful. You should always say, like, Morva, you didn't answer my question. Can you say, you missed it, answer something else. Other things that are on people's minds, things that you're thinking about, things that you would like to know.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Rachel, and my son Akiva would be starting out in preschool, so very little one. And what I'm, given your research background before coming in, I would love to hear more about what approach you and the teachers use, particularly in education, to tackle the pattern that we often see where classroom work, workplace work, community work on racial justice ends up falling to or singling out students of color or people in workplace of color. And it's one thing when you're in a room full of adults or high schoolers even to talk about allyship or what's your fight or not, but how do you do that with 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, well, 3-year-olds who have a much more sort of simple view of the world?
This is a great question. And I think I'm going to try to answer it and I might miss the boat. So you should like come back to me and say, no, that's not what I'm asking, or that's not satisfying. The work we're doing this year and last year and the upcoming year, and I think continuously, but there's a focused amount of work right now with the teachers at Giddens that is at the level of their practice as it relates to notions of justice, anti-bias education, multicultural education, anti-racism, right? So whichever one of those kind of terms we want to use, right, to bucket a category of work. What's important about that is that it's allowed us with outside expertise and with the associate head, Brenda, who's quite skilled at coaching, embedded coaching of teachers, is to engage in dilemmas of teaching. This is a dilemma. It's a dilemma in a classroom, right? About how do you talk about an issue, right? In which some of the kids in the classroom will, by identity, identify with what it is you're talking about, have an experience of it, right? And how do you hold those kids and care for them, right? And at the same time, challenge, right, the rest of the kids to learn about something that they, by the nature of who they are in the world and who their families are, aren't familiar with, right? So the first response to the question is, we know that that is a question to ask. We know that that is a thing to think about in our relationship to teaching, whatever that content is, whoever the kids are, right, in front of us. And so that's part of the work, is that as teachers, not a teacher alone on their own trying to figure this out, but as a community of teachers, these are the kind of questions, right, that we are inclined to ask ourselves and think about collaboratively, because those are very complex. Those are complex issues, right? So no teacher leaves their teacher education program with all the expertise they need. Of course they don't, right? So that's the first thing, is about that collaboration. The second thing I think is to work with families for whom we think that a particular conversation might be challenging, and to partner with them about that, right? So trying to understand your own child's relationship to a issue or to a question, right? Whether that's about like, it's interesting with little kids because they don't typically, I would say, they don't have language around it in a way that a third grader would have, right? So you have to pay attention to where they get uncomfortable, where they get quiet, right? And understand kind of the quieter cues about how somebody's responding to something. So I'll give you an example. So there's some work in the early childhood program. There's a particular unit that's related to homes. People have homes. What kind of homes do they have, right? And there's a wide conversation, right, as part of that teaching and learning work that engages challenges of people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are living on the street, right? And depending on who a kid is, they may or may not have a specific experience, right, to that content. They might. And it's important as a teacher to know that, because in that moment, you have to take care of that kid, right? And their emotional, this is where the social emotional work comes in, right? Their social emotional connection to whatever that topic is. Just like when you're in third grade and you don't actually want the African-American students in your school to have the first content they learn about related to their own history be slavery. That is not a good idea, right? And the questions that the staff are able to ask about that allows us to think differently about the sequence of the content as it relates to a particular issue regarding oppression or not, right? So that's a little bit out here, right? But I think What I'm trying to, I think, really press on is that we value that. We value those conversations. We think about them as an entire staff and faculty, because we know you never get to check the box, right? We know that that's work that we have to continue to do and think carefully about, related to a specific child, related to a specific context, related to our own identities, right, as their teachers. What does that mean and what does that translate as? I hope that's helpful.
I'm wondering if you, I don't have a very well formulated question, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your comments about helping students understand their strengths as learners, and then also the sort of where they can reach. And I think I'm interested in anecdotes. I mean, I'm not,
Sure.
I'm sort of interested. I know everybody is different, but I'm still interested in trying to get a better sense of ways that you see this happening.
I'm going to try to contemplate a few anecdotes that I hope will be helpful to you. One is personal, right, related to my own child, right? And it's social emotional work in nature, right? It's not academic work, but I think that's relevant because I think that's an important component of what we're doing as a school and what kids are learning. So when my kindergartner came to Giddens, he was, and continues to be at the age of 16, a very, hesitant's not the right word, but kind of willing to move aside for somebody else, right? So if somebody's poking at him, he'll just move a little bit, right? Somebody keeps poking at him, he'll just move a little bit more. Not necessarily a great advocate for himself in this way, right? And what Giddens helped him understand actually was that if somebody is poking at you and bothering you, you have to formulate, right, the words, the capacity to ask for what you need, right? You need to ask for what you need. You need to say, I need a little bit more space. I need some body space here. This is bothering me. Very, very quickly, again, you will learn a bug and a wish. It bugs me when you poke me. I wish you would scoot a foot to the left, right? Very specific kind of engagement of how we think about that work. Now, what's important about that scenario is that, one, very quickly, it was understood that he was a kid who needed to learn to advocate for himself, right? Really quickly out of the gate. And the other kid who was doing the poking was not in trouble. That kid also had to learn how to advocate for themselves, how to ask for what they needed, right? It wasn't you're bothering those other students, so you need to go over here with some consequence. It was, you have a set of skills that you also need to develop, right? And that's an important view. And that's what I mean, right? In any interaction like that, actually, all the kids are learning. And so the question becomes, what are they learning? And how can we help them learn a set of skills or a way of being, right? That is kinder, right? And more authentic to what they actually need. So that's a good, I think, example. I'll give an academic example. So Giddens believes, kind of foundationally, if you were to walk into a classroom at Giddens, mostly what you would see in terms of the work that kids are doing is mostly in small groups, right? There's some, not really direct instruction, but there's instruction by a teacher, right? A lesson, a concept developed, right? In interaction and collaboration with the kids. And then there's often small group time, right? Where kids are working on something together. Maybe they're working on something independently, but they're definitely talking about the work that they're doing together. And that small group setting allows us academically to do a number of things. It allows us to, number one, think about, oh, here's a group of children in first grade, let's say, who are continuing to struggle with their short vowel sounds, right? They do need to learn their short vowel sounds. They're not behind, it's not a problem, but they need to lead, they need some more instruction, right, around their short vowel sounds. And the small group work allows us, right, that teacher with the identification of that challenge to lean into that group of kids and say, okay, great. You all, we're going to come together. We're going to do this 15-minute lesson. I'm going to focus in with you on short vowel sounds. We're going to do some more work here. No shame, super normalized, right? Like that's just, of course, people are learning things at different times. That's what happens in the world. People learn things at different times. There's nothing surprising about that, right? That's actually quite normal. And, oh, this group over here is, oh, they've really like already at first grade, they've figured out their decoding, they understand their decoding strategies, and they're starting to actually emerge as people who are working on comprehension. So I'm going to take this group over here, I'm going to work on comprehension, right? And I know that because I've done all the assessment work. It helps me identify what an individual kid's needs. I see that in relationship to another group of kids in my classroom. There's a sense of membership and belonging to that group, and that we're stretching both of those kids. It's not seen as you're behind and we're catching you up in this group. You're so far ahead that we're pushing you along. It's like, this is just what you need. And so as a result, right, we're responding in that way. So there's a lot of work, you know, inside of that to really know where a kid is intellectually on proficiency. You're never going to hear me say like, oh, this kid, you will never hear me say this kid is really smart at math. You will hear me say this kid is proficient. They have a set of skills. They have some other things to learn over here, because actually it's not an attribute of the individual, right? Learning is something that you work on and are exposed to and you persist on, and every kid can do that. And of course there are differences there, and you want to attend to those differences, but that's kind of the way we think about the teaching and learning aspect of that at Giddens. Dawn, I hope that's a helpful response or enough of a texture. I appreciate that question because you can kind of talk at vagaries, right? And kind of in a vague way. And it's like really helpful to have some specifics. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. It was
Other
Hi
things
there.
folks want to know. Hi.
Hey, Morba. So we'll go from specific to a fairly broad question that I have.
Great.
We'll shift gears a little. And my question's about your teachers, and you know, hear wonderful things about your teachers. I'd be curious what it is that you look for and how you think about values and competencies and characteristics, as well as the diversity that the teachers bring to the broader community.
That's great. I think a couple of things, one of which is just a little bit of background on the teachers at Giddens. I think we are lucky because we have a staff that is mixed in terms of their experience as teachers, their experience as Giddens. So I have a number of people on staff who have been there 18, 19, 20 years, right? And have a lot of experience both as teachers and as people in that community, right? Have a lot of historical knowledge, right, about the culture and the place, right, and the grounding. And that's really good. And it's also really powerful to have brand new teachers, right, who are learning the work of teaching, who are bringing in a different set of ideas or developing a set of ideas, right? And that combination, I think, is a good combination. It's a combination. It's a really healthy combination to have, right? So that mix, right, already allows me to think carefully about any new person who's coming on staff, right? What do they contribute? What do they contribute in terms of their own expertise? What are they really knowledgeable about? What are they really good at, right? What are they really leaning in terms of learning? And that can be a first-year teacher. That isn't about time, right? That's about engagement, interest, right? I think a lot about the race, ethnicity of the staff. Depending on how you look at it, right? Depending on what your metrics are, Giddens is typically more diverse actually by staff numbers than a traditional public school. Is that diverse enough? No, it's not. Are there things that we are continuing to do to try to make strategic decisions in terms of being a place where teachers of color would come? Absolutely. One of the things we know actually is that teachers of color in many ways enter the teaching profession through early childhood because it is the place where there are low barriers to entry. You can access it, right? So, you know, the majority of my teachers of color are on the early grades. They're sitting in the early grades. There's a reason for that. I know that reason exists, right? And continuing conversations with them about their own development, their own learning over time is really important. And the reason that diversity of staff matters is for a whole bunch of reasons, but just to name them, one of which is you want teachers to reflect the ethnicity and race of the kids that you have in the school, right? Because not because their teaching practices are so different, but because actually research actually demonstrates that having somebody in a position of authority when you are a young child who is the same race or ethnicity you is a powerful thing to experience, and it's a valuable thing. It's also a powerful thing to experience as a dominant person of the dominant culture, mostly white in this context, right? That you're experiencing somebody who's a person of color in a position of power in relationship to you, right? It changes the way you conceptualize what that means. It's also important because on the staff, right, based in experience, it brings a different set of perspectives. Not that the perspective is necessarily right or wrong, but it allows you, it changes the way that you engage in conversation, right? And that's important to continue to think about those issues. So all of those things are really important. When you're thinking specifically about teaching and learning, I like for people who want to learn. I want staff who want to learn, who understand that teaching actually is very difficult. It's hard to do. It's complex. It's the integration of content. How do I teach mathematics? Who are the people, who are the kids, right, that I'm working with? Who are the students that I'm working with, right? And what are the teaching practices I need to know? That is a very complicated, intricate web that's very dynamic. Teachers make something like over 120 decisions in every 5 minutes or something like that. It's an enormous amount, more than a traffic controller. So you have to develop their knowledge and expertise, and you have to develop that along the way. So Giddens just recently, actually, we're kind of, this is important, I think this is important, has restructured its compensation plan, kind of this, if you know much about teacher salaries, it's really like the more experience you have, the better you get paid, but you never get paid that well, right? But it just, you kind of just plod along based on experience, right? A 10-year teacher, 11-year teacher, a 5-year teacher, there's the scale, and this is how this works. Just recently, we revised the compensation plan at Giddens to better reflect an individual's desire to continue to learn, right? So things like advanced degrees or national board certification, but also developing out kind of a set of Giddens credentials where a teacher could come to me and say, Mort, I really want to learn about kids who are having a language disability, right? And I want to focus on that work for the next year. And this is the way I'm going to design my own professional development to do. I'm going to read these things. I'm going to go observe these teachers. I'm going to go visit this school. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to get super knowledgeable about it. And that's going to impact actually where they sit on the salary scale. What I want, the reason I'm telling you that is because I'm trying to indicate to you that you can't value something unless it actually shows up, right? In the way that you orchestrate the budget of the school, right? I can't really value teacher learning unless I create a system in the budget that allows for a lot of professional development, that allows for time, that allows for teachers to have agency about what they're interested and engaged in, right? All those things mesh together. So since you asked me a question that's way out here, right? There are organizational issues, right, that you have to orchestrate in order for that to become the culture of the school. And I look for learning, and the teachers look for learning, because they essentially, right, are having a lot of input on who gets hired. They're on all those interviewing committees, they participate, we talk about it. I don't think we've never been in a conflict about who to hire, right, as a staff. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Other things you're thinking about, want to know? How's it going? I mean, it's a really lengthy, gruesome process. It goes on forever. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Joanna, and I have a question. How do you create those tiny universes in the classes? How do you mix the classes to create this, how you say, flow of knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I think, how do you create the tiny universe of a class? I mean, I think one of the things that the Giddens teachers are particularly adept at, and it is related to how you build a community, right, is I don't know what your all's professions are or your jobs or where you work, if you work. But when I go to work, I like to feel like I belong there, right? I like to feel like I get to get a marker from the workroom when I need it, right? And so do kids, right? They want to belong there. They want to see themselves reflected. They want to see their home life enter that space with them, right? So like super small examples, like, but you know, we're going to ask you if you come to Giddens, we're going to say like, we need a picture of your family. Whatever your family looks like. And my family, that's like super complicated. It's like a super blended family. There are a lot of people. It's like changed over time, right? And yeah, okay, we have to produce a photograph or a couple photographs or 3 photographs every year that says, here's our family, right? And that's really important because you want your child, right, to be reflected in the space where they spend an unbelievable amount of time. It's a lot of time. So you want them to see themselves reflected, right? I think that's the first thing. And I think that starts for our teachers generally in a typical year where we would typically have them come and do a home visit. They would get to meet your kid. They would talk to you. Mostly they're interested in talking to your kid, which is a little bit challenging sometimes for adults when then another adult enters was like, really, I'm here to talk to your kid, right? Because I'm trying to understand who your kid is. I'm trying to remember what their life's like here so that when something arises in the classroom, I can say, oh, remember at home how you do blah, 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 blah. Or remember that stuffy on your bed named Isabel or whatever. And like, let's write about Isabel today, right? That's the connection, right? It's building a sense of belonging, and teachers do that in the most, it's like the everyday work of teaching. It's always saying hello. It's always wondering how you are. It's, you know, having a morning circle where the kids do a greeting with each other every day that they make up. It's giving them ownership about where their stuff is, right? It's all of those things that make an environment where you want to be. I mean, one of my standards as an adult, as a parent is I don't ever want to send my child to a school that I myself wouldn't want to be in. Why would I ask them to do that? And that's a pretty high standard as it turns out. Right? But I think those are all the ways that we think about those issues. And I'm so sorry that you can't come and see the school in action, because then you would just know, you would just walk through and you'd be like, wow, okay, great. Porsche is amazing. And look at that classroom. And Brandon does it a little bit differently, right? But look how everybody's there and reflected. And this isn't to say that like, I'm not Pollyannish, right? I'm not naive. There is conflict and there is disagreement and there is things that kids are sorting out and it's not always pretty, but school is a place to practice. It's a place to practice how to work on problems, how to solve things, how to talk to each other, right? And it's not always pretty. It's sometimes a little messy, right? And that's good. That's okay. You know, I had to get used to the fact that my son was sitting in a room where somebody was poking him all the time. And I had to kind of go, okay, I'm going to talk to the teacher and say, yeah, that's an issue, but where's his challenge and how can I support him, right?
Thank you.
A little bit along those lines, can you speak to parent involvement and where there's room for that and how you integrate it or encourage it? And I know it's different for each family, what they have the ability to come in the middle of the day or not, or.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways of participating, right, at Giddens. And they run the gamut from the organizational side, right, of the organization, like being on the board of trustees and participating on the finance committee and being on the equity and inclusion committee of the board, which is actually a really big group at Giddens, which is exciting and they're doing great work, or the Giddens Community Association, which is the period. So those are kind of the formal ways, right? There are the other formal ways of like attending a field trip or helping the teacher put up a bulletin board. And you know, mostly what we try to do is to if you were to come to Giddens, you would get a questionnaire, you know, in your kind of entry packet that says, what are you interested in? What do you like to do? Like, you know, and then we say, oh, great, there's a group that does this. And then we try to connect you, right? We think of it more of like, we're like your networker more than we are like trying to get you to do something for us, because we're trying to get you to feel connected, right, to the community. So participation in some level is about connection. And we don't have, unlike the need in some public schools, right, which is just privilege. This is not a critique of the public schools at all. Is we don't have a need, right, for people to come in and do the work of teaching and learning. We don't leverage parents, right, in the work of teaching and learning in that way. We do sometimes say, will you come in and share something about your family? Will you come talk to us about an aspect of your work or your culture or your history or something like that, right? Because we want kids to see adults, right, as like kind of interesting people. They've got a lot of interesting things to talk about. So I think it really runs the range. One of the things I appreciate about your question, and I think I appreciate about the school, is this is a diverse community, right? I have a few parents who don't work outside the home and have a lot of flexibility and time. And I have some parents who are working double jobs and working the night shift, and we don't see them. And that doesn't indicate to me anything about the care they have for the children or the care they have for education or the way that they value Giddens itself, right? It is no indication of that. It's just a reality. People have different privileges, right, that they can enact at any different point in time. And so that's important, right? We don't have an expectation that you have to do X. We do have an expectation that you are participating in the ways that you can that support the school and support your child to belong in that community, right? That's really the tenet there. That's the principle from which we're working. And then lots of people tie into that principle in a variety of ways. You're an important part of our community, and we hope that we get to know you, and we hope that you will show up so that other people get to know you. We think that's great. That's mostly what we care about, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
I'll jump in with one other question if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I know you've had a big move, and I imagine a mass amount of focus, if not all focus, in this past year or current year is on dealing with pandemic planning. But I'm curious if there are other kind of large initiatives or things on the horizon. If we're entering, I've applied for kindergarten, but you know, we would be at the school for a number of years. Are there other things, reviews of curriculum, you know, changes on the horizon? I guess maybe a related way would be, you know, do you have a kind of a systematic way that you try and incorporate the latest evidence on teaching or things? So that would just be interesting to know.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, we did move recently, just a year ago. And then we were in the building, I think 8 weeks, and then we were impacted by COVID. So it's been an interesting couple of years with a lot of change, although I would say that we have fared really well through all of those transitions as a community, right? As a whole community. Which has enabled that not all of my time actually is spent thinking about COVID, right? Although much of it, but not all of it. And so thinking really strategically about where the school is now and kind of what's next. So I appreciate that question. On the backside, right, the compensation plan is a big component of the work I have been doing in the last probably year and a half, I would say, right? Unrelated to, in some ways unrelated to the experience that your kid is going to have, but I think actually really important to the experience that your kid is going to have. The school for a very long time has had a configuration on the multi-age groupings K through 5 in a very particular way, right? It's been a K1 cohort, a 2-3 cohort, and a 4-5 cohort for as long as I can remember. And when I started at Giddens, Portia, who's been there quite some time and has been a K1 teacher for quite some time, was like more of a, will you think about a reconfiguration, right, of the multi-age grades, right? And I said, yes, Portia, I will, but we can't make that transition now. First of all, I got to get my feet underneath me. I'm brand new. Second, we're in this building project. You got to stage these things out. So as we enter into next year, we've done a lot of thinking about those multi-age groupings, and COVID has actually helped us do some thinking because of the way we've had to configure the school this year. So we're making a transition in the upcoming year to 2 single kindergarten classrooms, right? Because one of the things I think the teachers are interested in exploring and have done some reading about is kind of understanding kindergarten itself as an entry point into schooling and what it means to be a kindergarten as you make transition, and giving space to that, right? Really very good about the K1. I think that we have sometimes missed because of the K1 model, and there'll be some advantages to it being K. There'll be some downsides also, but that's important. And so the teachers really, in collaboration with myself and with Brenda Cram, who's the associate head, who I mentioned earlier, have been discussing kind of what's that configuration, right? And so we're in a transition related to that. We think the multi-age is important, and so we're retaining that in second grade and the third and fourth grade because it allows kids to do, first of all, challenges that we know that learn at different paces. It's actually, grades are just an arbitrary thing. They just made that up in about 1890 by the committee. So like, it's like to leverage a multi-grade classroom. And how you think about where kids and what the pacing is. Once of leadership, right, as the second unit cohort, and the moment of being a new and learning that, and then having a fifth grade. So not dissimilar from kindergarten is that the fifth graders have some very particular thing going on for them, which is just like you started applying to middle school in late September, early October. It kind of consumes a component of their experience that we think would be good to work on with them separately from the fours, right? And so the staff has been thinking a lot about that configuration. About 4 years ago, we reviewed the evidence related to homework. We made a very big homework shift and moved away from homework as a kind of a generic tool. It really only occurs if some kind of project and they have some things to finish at home with you, not that frequently. If your kid is in need of enrichment or additional support, they have some very targeted work, right? Your kid really connected to what they need, not some kind of generic packet of, I don't know, math practice problems. These are the 2 big things. Complete curriculum, right? It forces. It's good about a lot of school. Everybody will be doing that collectively. It's one great that's really potential engage. That question, I think, should be a cycle of reviewing and assessing kind of the goal and based in evidence and evaluations to in where would they, what math curriculum would they look at and why and look like, and putting that cycle of exploring. So I think those are the big things on the horizon. It will feel funny to have next year. We have just had a lot of change. I don't think it has been negative. I don't think, right now I've talked to all of the teachers this year. Everybody is returning. That's remarkable in a year like this. So I don't think it's been destabilizing. I think it's been challenging and hard. But I think we feel strong as a community, and that's going to propel us into an upcoming year, which I hope we are looking at something a little bit different than the year we have been in.
Maybe along similar lines, I know that when you were at your old building, you had a pretty active engagement with the community around, and at some of the previous sessions, there was sort of discussion about the move and just not yet sort of getting as involved in that. And I was wondering if there are plans or if there's more thought about how to get more involved in the very immediate neighborhood.
Yep. You're right. The service learning component of the school has been really important guidance, right? And it was important in the old building, and part of that is it's generated from your connections to a particular neighborhood, right? Like you're in this neighborhood, and we made the transition, and then COVID kind of got us delayed because like nobody's doing anything like that right now, right? So I think we are working on kind of what's up and coming. We've made some connections to some of the nonprofits in the 2100 building. Interestingly, I mean, there are formal things that I think we have to work on, right? And kind of thinking about what's the continuity of service learning as it progresses from preschool to 5th grade. And I actually think it's a good time because I think there is revision there. I think there were things that we used to that could have been that are designed because of that's all. So I think this is my I think that they often include things like helping kids develop a perspective. Some they're not relationship, right? Thinking about understanding what that person might need, not assuming what that person might need, right? And then developing a sort of around or friends. And I think that's really after is the notion of reciprocity, right? Rather than just saving somebody or anything like that, right? We're after that notion of reciprocity. So I don't have specific partnerships right now relating them. And although I would say my teachers are doing well this year in 5, they don't have a lot of band. I'm at total bandwidth. I got no, there's no extra. They're like, hey, would somebody like to think about, or let's engage this challenge, or let's really talk deeply about service. They just don't have it, which I totally appreciate. I'm not about to put that on their plate, but that doesn't mean that we don't care about that or that the teachers don't care about that. We have been doing some interesting things, I think, in the community. We have a pretty big impacted group of folks who live on the street behind the school. And we've connected with them and do some due diligence just around basic needs, like we supply those guys with water and have gotten them connected and have done a bunch of work around that. The GA is putting a free pantry for the school that's quite large, which is like a what do you call it? Like a staple house, right? For where you can go get food, right? That will do. So these are small things, right? And kids are engaged in that and thinking, one of the very near restaurants very close to us just had kind of a tragedy, and they reached out to us directly to say, hey, do you have a group of kids who would make these 30 flower pots for this GoFundMe campaign for this person? Oh yeah, right. So map your say here what it means, and I don't that all but I kind of third grade.
Morva, you're breaking up a bunch.
Sorry. Let me come off and
yeah, we're not hearing you at this point.
Great. Now?
Yeah.
Better?
Yes.
Great. Sorry, I just had to switch the internet. Somebody else, there's 6 people who live in this house dealing with the internet, so sometimes it can go wonky. Tell me if that doesn't stabilize. I mean, I think we're really engaged in the service learning work, we're trying to figure it out, right? And part of what I want to be cautious about is not walking in and saying, we have an idea, we'd like to do this for your community, but learning about what the community in fact needs, right? In relationship to them.
Well, I'll put in a small plug. I know there's a notice of proposed land use action, kitty corner with a new building going in, and I live only 2 blocks away, and the more people we have clamoring for more sidewalks, the better. So if school children is like the poster child case for more sidewalks. So if you want to put that out there, Ether would be much appreciated. I'm certainly doing my part on that front.
Yep. Yeah, there will be new sidewalks for that new building project. We actually sold that land to 2 other nonprofits, Jazz Ed, which is a nonprofit music organization, and what used to be Capitol Hill Housing, which does affordable housing. And Patty Hearn, who was the prior head at Lake Washington Girls Middle School, and I made a decision to actually, when we needed to sell that land, to sell that to 2 other nonprofits and not to a real estate developer, because we were interested in supporting affordable housing. And yes, for sidewalks would be great.
I'm noticing the time, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time and schedules. Is there a last question that someone wants to ask to close out this event?
Or 2.
Or, yeah, or 2.
Otherwise it feels bad, the good last one. As a 4th grade teacher, I had a lot of experience with wait time. Did a lot of waiting.
You don't have to have a question.
No.
I'll just do a quick one. Nuts and bolts, are you still accepting applications for this year? Or are you totally waitlisted?
We are. So the caveat would be that we are reviewing applications right now in this moment in order to be able to communicate by March 19th. And depending on when a person may enter into the application process and apply, if it's after that date and we've already offered spots to families, we may not have a spot in a particular grade. But certainly any spots that we still have available, if any, then we just move into a rolling admission cycle, and we'll continue to engage families until those, until we have families that we think would be great fits, and students great fits for those spots. So for families that want to be considered for this first kind of round while we're in this space of reviewing applications, should certainly turn in their applications soon.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming this evening and meeting with us and hearing from Morva. These are all recorded, and so you can always go back to any of the virtual events and listen to those. And like I said, in 2 weeks we'll have another. We'll have a final event out of this series with our parent panel. So I hope you'll consider coming to that as well, and continue to reach out.
I have one more thing I'll say, just because I was thinking about it, which I think is sometimes invisible at the school. So as you're thinking about schooling, for many people, right, kind of the before school, after school care is a really important component. And that's a high percentage of parents leverage our after school care, our extended day program. A few years ago, for reasons related to equity, we embedded the cost of the extended day program into the overall cost of tuition. So you won't get billed extra for coming to extended day. You can use it to say, oh, I'm running late, and or today I need my kid to be there at 4:30. There's no kind of registration impact related to that. I think our view of that is that most of our families are working families. They need the flexibility. We don't want to kind of say, oh, here's the cost of tuition, but and there's another $3,000 for full-time extended day. This is what it costs. It's wrapped in. It puts us all wrapped in together at a lower end of the tuition scale, all of which is very high, I realize. But I think that's an important component of the school, that we have done some things to try to really think through the tuition model and what it's meant differentially, a differential impacts across a diverse set of families. And so I just wanted to highlight that for folks as you're contemplating both, you know, kind of overall quality of the program and kind of what kind of supports you need as a family as you're moving into the next year. Like Ken said, we're really thrilled to see you and to continue to have these conversations. I'm a person that does most of my thinking in the middle of the night and often wake up with a question and say, oh, I wish I had said this or asked this. So if you're that person too, or if you do that thinking now or a week from now, please feel free to reach out to us. Our goal is to really help you have the information you need to make a good decision for your kid. It's nothing but that, really. And so for what you need, you should keep talking to us and asking us what it is that helps you figure that out along the way. And I hope this conversation has been helpful.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.